Imagine a boy so gifted that, by the age of 10, he had memorized the entire sacred text of his faith, along with a great deal of literature besides, and was already outstripping his teachers. Imagine a young man who, before he had reached the age of 18, had mastered nearly the whole of the knowledge of his age, the logic and the mathematics, the natural sciences and the astronomy, the philosophy and above all the medicine, teaching himself much of it from books, working through the night, refusing to rest until he had understood. Imagine a mind so powerful that, when he came at last to the hardest questions of philosophy, he would read a difficult book dozens of times, commit it to memory, and walk the streets wrestling with its meaning until understanding broke upon him. Imagine a physician so skilled that, while still in his teens, he was summoned to treat a dying king whom the older doctors could not cure, and succeeded, and was rewarded with the freedom of the Royal Library, one of the greatest collections of books in the world. Imagine a scholar who would go on to write, amid a life of constant upheaval and danger, two of the most influential books in the history of human thought, a vast encyclopedia of medicine that would be studied for 600 years, and a great summary of philosophy that would shape the thinking of civilizations both East and West. Imagine a life lived on the run, through political chaos and exile and imprisonment, and yet filled, through it all, with an unquenchable devotion to knowledge. This is the story of such a man. His name was Ibn Sina, though in the lands to the west he came to be known by another name, Avicenna. He was born more than 1,000 years ago, near the city of Bukhara, in the lands of Central Asia, in an age that has been called a golden age of learning. He was a physician, a philosopher, an astronomer, a mathematician, a poet, a master of nearly every science of his time, perhaps the most brilliant and influential of all the philosopher-scientists of the medieval world, and the books he wrote, composed amid a life of remarkable turbulence, would shape the course of human knowledge for centuries after his death. We will follow his whole life tonight, slowly and gently, from his birth in a small town near Bukhara to his astonishing boyhood, his teenage mastery of the sciences, his rise as a physician and a scholar, his years of wandering and exile through a turbulent age, the great works he composed, and the close of his restless and brilliant life. It is a story about the love of knowledge, about a mind of extraordinary power devoted wholly to understanding, about the pursuit of learning sustained through every danger and upheaval. And through it all runs a quiet question, gentle and enduring. What does it mean to be given a great gift, and to spend a life pouring it out in the pursuit of understanding? So settle in, and let your mind grow calm. There is no hurry here. We have a long and peaceful journey ahead, through a distant world and a single remarkable life. You do not need to remember every name or every date. You only need to rest, and to listen, and to let this old story carry you gently toward sleep. Wherever you are, however tired you feel, you are welcome here. Let the cares of the day grow quiet, and let us travel back together to a world that is more than 1,000 years old. Perhaps you have felt, in some quiet moment of your own, the pull of the thing that drove this man's whole life, the desire to understand, to know, to grasp the workings of the world and the truths that lie beneath its surface. We are all, in our way, curious creatures, drawn to understand the world we find ourselves in, delighting in the moments when something obscure becomes clear. Ibn Sina possessed this desire to a degree almost beyond imagining, a hunger for understanding so powerful that it drove him, through every hardship and danger, to master nearly the whole of the knowledge of his age. There is a quiet wonder, as the night settles, in keeping company with a mind so devoted to understanding, so tireless in its pursuit of knowledge. So as we begin the long walk back through his life, carry no burden of effort. You are not being asked to study or to remember. You are being invited to rest, and to let an old and true story unfold at its own unhurried pace, the way the night itself unfolds, slowly and gently, toward the quiet of deep sleep. We will move softly, and there is nothing you need to do but listen, and let the calm of it settle over you like a blanket drawn up in the dark. To understand the man, we must first understand the world that made him, and it was a remarkable world, one of the most brilliant in the history of human learning. We must travel back to the 10th century, to the lands of Central Asia and Persia, to an age that has often been called a golden age of Islamic civilization. For in those centuries, the lands of the Islamic world were home to a flourishing of learning and science and philosophy unmatched anywhere on earth at that time, a great efflorescence of the human mind that gathered up the knowledge of many earlier civilizations and carried it forward to new heights. This was an age in which the inheritance of the ancient world, the philosophy and science of the Greeks, the mathematics of the Indians, the wisdom of the Persians, had been gathered, translated, studied, and built upon by the scholars of the Islamic world. The great works of ancient learning had been translated into Arabic, the common language of scholarship across that vast civilization, and scholars from many lands and peoples studied and extended them, making new discoveries, writing new works, pushing forward the boundaries of knowledge in medicine and mathematics, astronomy and philosophy, and many other fields. It was a cosmopolitan age of learning, drawing on many traditions, conducted in a common scholarly language, spread across a vast and connected civilization. And the lands of Central Asia, where Ibn Sina was born, were among the great centers of this flourishing. The city of Bukhara, in particular, near which he was born, was a jewel of learning and culture, the capital of a dynasty that ruled those lands and patronized scholarship and the arts. It was a wealthy and sophisticated city, a center of trade on the great routes that connected east and west, and a gathering place for scholars, poets, and learned men. To grow up near such a city in such an age was to grow up in one of the most stimulating intellectual environments the world had ever known, surrounded by learning, with access to books and teachers and the company of the learned. It was also, we must understand, an age of political instability and frequent upheaval for all its intellectual brilliance. The great empire that had once united the Islamic world had fragmented into many smaller kingdoms and dynasties, which rose and fell, warred with one another, and were often unstable and short-lived. The dynasty that ruled Bukhara in Ibn Sina's youth would itself collapse during his lifetime, plunging the region into chaos and forcing him into the wandering life that would mark his later years. The brilliance of the age's learning coexisted with the turbulence of its politics, and Ibn Sina's life would be shaped by both, his devotion to knowledge pursued against a background of constant political danger and upheaval. This, then, was the world into which he came, a golden age of learning, when the knowledge of many civilizations had been gathered and extended to new heights, centered in brilliant cities like Bukhara, but troubled by political instability and frequent upheaval. Into this world a child was born, of extraordinary gifts, who would master nearly the whole of its vast learning, and would carry that learning forward, through a life of remarkable turbulence, in works that would shape human thought for centuries. Let us linger a while longer in that golden age of learning, for it was one of the most remarkable epochs in the history of the human mind, and understanding it helps us to see the soil from which Ibn Sina's genius grew. The centuries in which he lived, and the ones just before, witnessed an extraordinary flourishing of learning across the lands of the Islamic world, a great gathering and extending of human knowledge that has few parallels in history. The roots of this flourishing lay in a great movement of translation and study that had begun a century or two before Ibn Sina's birth. The scholars of the Islamic world, hungry for knowledge, had sought out the learning of the civilizations that had come before them, the philosophy and science of the ancient Greeks, the mathematics and astronomy of the Indians and the Persians, the medicine of many traditions. They had gathered these works, translated them into Arabic, the the common scholarly language of their civilization, and studied them intensely, mastering the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world. And they had not merely preserved this knowledge but extended it, making new discoveries, correcting old errors, pushing forward the boundaries of understanding in field after field. The result was a civilization of remarkable learning, in which the sciences flourished as nowhere else on earth at that time. In mathematics, scholars developed new methods and made new discoveries, advancing the science far beyond what the ancients had known. In astronomy, they observed the heavens with care, built observatories, refined the understanding of the movements of the stars and planets. In medicine, they gathered and extended the healing knowledge of many traditions, advancing the understanding of diseases and their treatments. In philosophy, they studied and developed the thought of the ancient Greeks, wrestling with the deepest questions of existence. It was an age of extraordinary intellectual vitality, in which the human mind reached new heights across many fields. And this flourishing was supported by the wealth and the patronage of the age, for the rulers and the wealthy of that civilization often valued learning and supported it generously. They founded libraries, gathering great collections of books from across the known world. They patronized scholars, providing them with support and security so that they could pursue their studies. They built institutions of learning, places where knowledge could be studied and taught and advanced. This patronage created the conditions in which learning could flourish, in which scholars could devote themselves to their studies, in which the great works of the age could be composed. The royal library of Bukhara, which would be so important to the young Ibn Sina, was one fruit of this culture of patronage and learning. There was, too, a remarkable openness and cosmopolitanism to the learning of this age, a willingness to gather knowledge from many sources and traditions. The scholars of the Islamic world drew on the learning of the Greeks and the Indians and the Persians and many others, valuing truth wherever it could be found, regardless of its origin. Scholars of different backgrounds and even different religions worked alongside one another, contributing to the common enterprise of learning. It was a cosmopolitan culture of knowledge, drawing on many traditions, conducted across a vast and connected civilization, united by the common language of scholarship and the common pursuit of understanding. This openness, this willingness to learn from all sources, was one of the great strengths of the age and one of the conditions of its remarkable achievements. Into this flourishing culture of learning Ibn Sina was born, and it shaped him profoundly. He grew up surrounded by the accumulated learning of this great age, with access to its books and its teachers and its institutions. He could study the gathered knowledge of many civilizations, translated into the language he knew, organized and extended by the scholars who had come before him. He could draw on the great library of Bukhara, with its vast collection of works. He could learn from the living tradition of scholarship that surrounded him. The golden age of learning provided the soil in which his extraordinary gifts could grow and flourish, the accumulated knowledge that his powerful mind could master and extend. And Ibn Sina would become, in turn, one of the great glories of this golden age, one of its most brilliant minds, who gathered up its learning and carried it to new heights. He was both a product of the age and one of its supreme achievements, formed by its culture of learning and then contributing to that culture works of such brilliance that they became among its greatest monuments. In him, the golden age of learning reached one of its highest points, producing a mind that mastered nearly the whole of its vast knowledge and extended it in works that would shape human thought for centuries. To understand Ibn Sina, we must understand this golden age that formed him, and to understand the golden age, we can look to Ibn Sina, one of its most brilliant and characteristic fruits. So let us leave the wide world behind now, and turn toward a small town near the great city of Bukhara, where a child was born who would become one of the most brilliant minds in the history of the world. The place was a small town called Avicenna, near the great city of Bukhara, in the lands of Central Asia, that are now part of Uzbekistan. And it was here, around the year 980, that the child who would become Ibn Sina was born, and given the name Al-Hussein. His father was a man of some education and standing, an official in the service of the ruling dynasty, a man who valued learning, and would ensure that his gifted son received the best education available. The family soon moved to the city of Bukhara itself, the capital, the great center of learning and culture, and it was here that the young Ibn Sina grew up and received his early education. From his earliest years, it became clear that this was a child of extraordinary gifts. His memory was prodigious, his understanding quick, his hunger for knowledge insatiable. By the accounts, much of which come from an autobiography that Ibn Sina himself dictated later in life, he was set to study from a very young age, and he advanced with astonishing speed, quickly surpassing what was expected of a child his age. We should hold the details of this autobiography with some care, for it was written to illustrate his ideas as much as simply to record his life, and the memory of a brilliant man recalling his own childhood may polish the truth here and there. But the broad picture it paints of a child of truly extraordinary precocity is confirmed by all that we know of him, and by the astonishing achievements of his youth. By the age of 10, it is said, he had memorized the entire sacred text of his faith, the whole of the Quran, along with a great deal of literature and grammar besides. This was a remarkable achievement for so young a child, but it was only the beginning. For the young Ibn Sina then turned to the wider world of learning, to the sciences and philosophy that were flourishing in his age, and he advanced through them with a speed that astonished everyone around him. He studied arithmetic and law, logic and geometry and astronomy, working through the texts of each science, mastering them one after another, often outpacing his teachers until there was no one left who could teach him, and he had to continue on his own. Let us dwell more deeply on the astonishing childhood and youth of Ibn Sina, for the precocity of his early years is one of the most remarkable things about him, and it repays closer attention. For here was a mind of such extraordinary power that it mastered, in a few short years of youth, knowledge that takes most people a lifetime to acquire, if they acquire it at all. We have noted that by the age of 10 he had memorized the entire sacred text of his faith, along with much literature besides. We should pause to feel the remarkableness of this. The sacred text is a substantial book, and to memorize it entirely is a significant achievement even for a dedicated adult. For a child of 10 to have accomplished this, along with the mastery of literature and grammar, speaks of a memory and a capacity for learning far beyond the ordinary. And this was, as we have seen, only the beginning, the foundation upon which he would build, with astonishing speed, the mastery of nearly the whole of the learning of his age. What is perhaps most remarkable about his youthful learning is how much of it he accomplished by his own effort, teaching himself the hardest knowledge of his age through sheer determination. He had teachers in his early years, of course, who set him on his way and taught him the foundations, but he quickly outpaced them, advancing beyond what they could teach him, until he had to continue on his own, mastering the sciences through his own study of the texts. This self-teaching, this capacity to master difficult knowledge through his own effort, was one of the marks of his extraordinary mind, and it served him throughout his life, allowing him to continue learning and growing long after he had exhausted what his teachers could offer. The accounts of his method of self-teaching are fascinating, and they reveal much about the quality of his mind. When he came to a difficult subject, he would work through it systematically, mastering its principles, building his understanding step by step. When he encountered a difficult text, he would read it again and again, committing it to memory, until he had it entirely by heart. And then he would wrestle with its meaning, turning it over in his mind, considering it from every angle, until understanding came. He did not give up in the face of difficulty, but persisted, working at a hard problem with relentless determination until he had mastered it. This combination of a powerful memory, a penetrating intelligence, and a relentless determination was the engine of his extraordinary learning. There is a famous account, which captures his method and his determination, of how he wrestled with a particular work of philosophy, one of the most difficult of the ancient texts. By the accounts, he read this work many times, by some reports 40 times, until he had memorized it entirely, and yet still he could not grasp its meaning, could not penetrate to its deepest sense. He was baffled, frustrated, unable to understand a text he had committed entirely to memory. And then, by chance, he came upon a commentary that unlocked the work's meaning, that revealed the sense he had been unable to grasp. And in his joy and gratitude at finally understanding, it is said, he gave alms to the poor, thanking God for the gift of understanding. The story captures both his determination, reading a difficult text 40 times, and his joy in understanding, the deep delight he took in finally grasping a difficult truth. This joy in understanding, this delight in the grasping of difficult truths, was perhaps the deepest motivation of his learning. He did not pursue knowledge merely for advantage or reputation, though these came to him. He pursued it for the joy of understanding itself, for the deep satisfaction of grasping the truth, of penetrating to the heart of a difficult matter, of seeing clearly what had been obscure. This love of understanding for its own sake, this delight in knowledge, was the wellspring of his extraordinary learning, the force that drove him to master nearly the whole of the knowledge of his age. And it is a love that anyone who has known the joy of understanding can recognize. The deep satisfaction of finally grasping something difficult, the delight of seeing clearly what had been obscure. We can wonder what it would be like to possess such a mind, such a capacity for learning, such a love of understanding. Most of us learn slowly and with effort, mastering knowledge bit by bit, forgetting much of what we learn. To possess a mind that could master the hardest knowledge with such speed, that could memorize entire books, that could teach itself the most difficult sciences, would be an extraordinary gift indeed. Ibn Sina possessed such a mind, one of the most powerful in the history of human learning, and he used it to the full, pouring its energies into the mastery and the extension of knowledge. The precocity of his youth was the first flowering of this extraordinary gift, the early sign of the brilliant mind that would go on to shape human thought for centuries. And yet we should not imagine that his gift made his learning effortless, that he simply absorbed knowledge without work. On the contrary, the accounts make clear that he worked intensely, studying through the night, wrestling with difficult problems, persisting through frustration and difficulty. His gift was not a substitute for effort, but a multiplier of it. He worked hard, and his extraordinary gifts made his hard work extraordinarily productive. There is a lesson in this, that even the greatest gifts must be developed through effort, that genius itself must labor to bear fruit. Ibn Sina was given extraordinary gifts, but he also worked extraordinarily hard to develop and use them, and it was the combination of the gift and the labor that produced his astonishing achievements. A famous account tells how he taught himself, in these years, working through the great texts of philosophy and science by his own effort, with a determination that would not be defeated. When he came to a difficult text, he would read it again and again, by some accounts dozens of times, until he had it by heart, and then he would wrestle with its meaning, turning it over in his mind, walking the streets in thought, refusing to give up until understanding came. It is said that when a particular work of philosophy defeated him, he read it 40 times and still could not grasp it, until at last he came upon a commentary that unlocked its meaning, and in his joy and gratitude he gave alms to the poor. This is the picture the accounts paint. A young mind of tremendous power and even greater determination, teaching himself the hardest knowledge of his age through sheer relentless effort. By his middle teens, he had turned in earnest to the study of medicine, and here too he advanced with astonishing speed. Medicine, he is reported to have said, was not one of the difficult sciences, and he mastered it quickly, not only learning it from books but beginning to practice it, treating patients, learning the art of healing through experience as well as study. And he proved remarkably skilled, so that even as a very young man, still in his teens, he gained a reputation as a physician of unusual ability, sought out for his skill in healing, consulted even by established doctors much older than himself. The boy who had mastered the sciences was becoming a healer of remarkable gifts. It was his skill as a physician that brought him, while still a teenager, to the great turning point of his early life. For the ruler of Bukhara, the Samanid emir who governed those lands, fell seriously ill, and the established physicians of the court could not cure him. The young Ibn Sina, whose reputation had already spread, was summoned to treat the king, and he succeeded where the older doctors had failed, restoring the ruler to health. It was a remarkable triumph for one so young, and it brought him to the favor of the ruler and the court. And his reward was one that mattered more to him than gold or position. Access to the royal library of the Samanids, one of the greatest collections of books in the world. For the young Ibn Sina, whose hunger for knowledge was insatiable, this was a treasure beyond price. He was given the freedom of this vast library, with its countless volumes on every science, many of them rare and difficult to find, and he threw himself into it, reading voraciously, devouring the accumulated learning of the ages. By his own account, he read through the library, studying the works of the ancients and the moderns, absorbing knowledge of every kind, and by the time he had finished, while still a very young man, he had mastered nearly the whole of the learning of his age. He is said to have remarked that what he knew then was what he knew at the end of his life. He had only deepened his understanding since, not added new fields of knowledge. By 18, the boy had become master of nearly all the knowledge of his time. Had Ibn Sina lived in a peaceful and stable age, we might imagine him settling into a long and quiet life of scholarship, surrounded by books, supported by a grateful court, pursuing his studies in tranquility. But this was not to be, for the age in which he lived was one of political turbulence and frequent upheaval, and his life would be shaped, from his early manhood onward, by instability, danger, and constant movement. The brilliant scholar would become a wanderer, an exile, moving from court to court and city to city, pursuing his work amid a chaos that never let him rest. The moment when the young Ibn Sina gained access to the royal library of Bukhara deserves to be dwelt upon, for it was a turning point in his life, and it speaks to something deep about the love of knowledge and the treasures that books represent. We have noted that, having cured the ailing ruler when the older physicians had failed, the teenage Ibn Sina was rewarded with the freedom of this great library. Let us consider what this meant. A great library, in that age, was a treasure beyond price, one of the rarest and most valuable things in the world. Books were precious, each one copied by hand, laborious to produce, difficult to obtain. A great collection of them, gathering the learning of many ages and many lands, represented an accumulation of knowledge that existed in few places on earth. The Royal Library of the Samanids was one of the greatest such collections, holding countless volumes on every science, many of them rare works difficult or impossible to find elsewhere. To gain access to such a library was to gain access to the accumulated learning of the ages, a treasure that money could hardly buy. For the young Ibn Sina, whose hunger for knowledge was insatiable, this was the most precious reward imaginable, worth more than any gold or position. He had cured a king, and his reward was the freedom of one of the greatest libraries in the world. We can imagine his joy, the joy of a young mind hungry for knowledge suddenly given access to such a treasury of learning. By his own account, he threw himself into the library, reading voraciously, moving from book to book, science to science, devouring the accumulated knowledge of the ages. He studied the works of the ancients and the moderns, the Greeks and the Persians and the scholars of his own civilization, absorbing knowledge of every kind. There is a particular detail in his account of this time that captures the depth of his immersion. He described finding, in the library, works he had never seen before, by authors he had not known, on subjects he had not encountered, and he read them all, absorbing their knowledge, expanding his understanding in every direction. The library opened to him the full breadth of the learning of his age, far more than he could have found anywhere else, and he made the fullest possible use of it, reading through its treasures with the voracious hunger of a mind that could not be satisfied. By the time he had finished, while still a very young man, he had mastered nearly the whole of the learning of his age, much of it gained in those intensive years of reading in the royal library. A deeply moving quality fills this picture of the young scholar immersed in the great library, devouring the accumulated learning of the ages, his hunger for knowledge finding, at last, a treasury vast enough to feed it. It speaks to the love of books and learning that has moved the great scholars of every age, the deep delight in the accumulated wisdom of humanity that libraries represent. For a library is more than a collection of books. It is a treasury of human understanding, the gathered learning of many minds across many ages, available to whoever will come and read. And to a mind hungry for knowledge, like the young Ibn Sina, such a treasury is the most precious thing in the world. We might reflect on our own relationship to the treasures of accumulated knowledge, which are, in our age, more available than ever before. The learning that Ibn Sina could find only in a rare and precious royal library, accessible to few, is now available to almost anyone, in libraries and books, and the vast stores of knowledge that our age has made so widely accessible. We have access, most of us, to treasuries of knowledge that would have been beyond the dreams of all but the most privileged in Ibn Sina's age. And yet how often do we make use of this access, with anything like the hunger and the devotion that the young Ibn Sina brought to the royal library? His example might inspire us to value more deeply the treasures of knowledge available to us, to approach them with something of his hunger and his joy, to make fuller use of the accumulated learning that lies in our age so readily at hand. It is worth noting, too, a poignant detail that some accounts relate, that the great library of Bukhara was later destroyed by fire, its treasures lost. Ibn Sina, it is said, was sometimes accused by others of having profited from the library in a way they could not, having absorbed its learning before it was lost. Whether or not this detail is exact, it adds a poignancy to the story. The thought that the great treasury of learning that fed his young mind was later destroyed, its books lost to the flames. It reminds us of the fragility of the treasures of knowledge, of how easily the accumulated learning of ages can be lost, and of the importance of those who, like Ibn Sina, absorb and preserve and pass on what they have learned before it can be lost. For the knowledge that Ibn Sina gained in that library was not lost when the library burned, for he had absorbed it, made it his own, and would pass it on in his own works to the generations that came after. The first great upheaval came with the collapse of the dynasty that had ruled Bukhara, the Samanids, whose library had been the foundation of his learning. As their power crumbled, the stable world of his youth dissolved, and Ibn Sina, now a young man, was set adrift in a turbulent and dangerous landscape. His father died around this time as well, removing another anchor of stability. And so began the wandering life that would mark the rest of his days, a life of movement from place to place, seeking patrons and positions, fleeing dangers, never finding the lasting peace and stability that his scholarship deserved. He moved first to other cities of the region, seeking patronage and a place to work. For a time he found refuge at various courts, serving rulers as a physician and an advisor, for his skills made him valuable to the princes of the age, who prized a brilliant physician and a learned counselor. But these positions were never secure, for the politics of the age were treacherous and the fortunes of rulers rose and fell with bewildering speed. A patron might die or be overthrown or fall into conflict, and Ibn Sina would be forced to move on, to seek a new refuge, to begin again in a new place. His life became a series of such movements, from one court to another, one city to another, driven by the shifting dangers of a turbulent age. There is something poignant in this, in the spectacle of one of the greatest minds of the age unable to find a stable place to pursue his work, driven from city to city by the chaos of his times. We might wish that such a mind could have been given peace and security, the tranquility to pursue its studies undisturbed. Instead, Ibn Sina had to pursue his work amid constant upheaval, snatching time for study and writing between the demands of his official positions and the dangers that drove him from place to place. That he accomplished so much, wrote works of such magnitude and brilliance, amid such turbulence, is a sign of the extraordinary power of his mind and the depth of his devotion to knowledge. The wandering, exiled character of Ibn Sina's life deserves deeper reflection, for it is one of the most striking and poignant aspects of his story, and it holds a meaning worth pondering. Here was one of the greatest minds in the history of human learning, and yet he was denied, throughout his adult life, the peace and stability that his work so deserved, driven instead from place to place by the turbulence of his age. We have noted how the collapse of the dynasty that ruled his homeland set him adrift, and how he spent the rest of his life moving from court to court and city to city, seeking patrons and positions, fleeing dangers, never finding lasting peace. Let us feel the difficulty of this, the hardship of a life of such constant movement and insecurity. To have no settled home, no secure position, no assurance of safety, to be always at the mercy of the shifting fortunes of rulers and the dangers of a turbulent age, is a hard way to live, full of anxiety and disruption. And to pursue, amid such conditions, the demanding work of scholarship, the composition of great works requiring sustained thought and concentration, is harder still. And yet Ibn Sina did exactly this, pursuing his work amid all the turbulence and insecurity of his wandering life. This is one of the most remarkable things about him, and it speaks to an extraordinary strength of mind and depth of devotion. He did not let the hardships of his circumstances defeat his devotion to knowledge, did not wait for peace and security to do his work, but pursued it amid all the difficulty, composing his great works in whatever time and circumstances he could find. The turbulence of his age could drive him from place to place, but it could not stop him from thinking and writing, from pursuing the understanding he loved. A deep lesson waits in this, about the pursuit of our callings amid the difficulties of life. We often imagine that we need ideal conditions to do our best work, that we must wait for peace and security and freedom from distraction before we can pursue what we are called to. And there is truth in this. Ideal conditions help, and Ibn Sina would surely have accomplished even more had he been granted them. But his life also shows that great work can be done amid difficult conditions, that we need not wait for ideal circumstances, that devotion and determination can find a way to pursue our callings even amid the hardships and disruptions of life. Ibn Sina did not have ideal conditions. He had a turbulent and dangerous life, and yet he accomplished some of the greatest intellectual work in human history, pursuing it amid all the difficulty. His example encourages us to pursue our own callings, whatever they may be, even amid the imperfect and difficult conditions of our actual lives. We might also reflect on the particular poignancy of a great mind denied the peace it deserved, the spectacle of one of the greatest scholars of the age unable to find a stable place to pursue his work. There is a sadness in this, in the thought of so brilliant a mind harried from place to place, denied the tranquility that would have allowed it to accomplish even more. We cannot help but wonder what Ibn Sina might have produced had he been granted a long and peaceful life, the security and stability to pursue his studies undisturbed. The turbulence of his age was a real loss, not only to him but to all who would have benefited from the works he might have written in greater peace. And yet there is, perhaps, another way to see it as well. For the very difficulty of his circumstances, the constant movement and insecurity may have sharpened his devotion, intensified his determination, driven him to make the fullest use of whatever time and opportunity he had. A mind that knew it might be driven from its place at any moment, that could not count on peace and security, may have worked with a particular intensity and urgency, pouring out its energies while it could, refusing to waste the precious opportunities for study and writing that came its way. The turbulence that denied him peace may also have intensified his devotion, focused his energies, driven him to accomplish what he could, while he could. We cannot know, but it is possible that the very hardship of his life contributed, in this way, to the intensity and the productivity of his work. However we understand it, the picture of Ibn Sina pursuing his great work amid the turbulence of his wandering life is a deeply moving one. It shows us a mind so devoted to understanding, so determined in its pursuit of knowledge, that no hardship could defeat it, no insecurity could stop it. Driven from place to place, serving demanding masters, fleeing recurring dangers, he yet found the time and the focus to compose works of such depth and brilliance that they would shape human thought for centuries. It is a sign of the power of devotion, to the capacity of a determined mind to pursue its calling amid every difficulty, and it stands as an inspiration to all who must pursue their own callings amid the hardships and disruptions of their lives. For this is one of the most remarkable things about Ibn Sina, that he composed his great works not in tranquil retirement, but amid the chaos and movement of his wandering life. He wrote, by the accounts, in whatever time he could find, often at night after his official duties were done, sometimes while traveling, sometimes even, it is said, while imprisoned or in hiding. His mind was so powerful, his knowledge so complete, his concentration so intense, that he could compose major works under conditions that would have defeated a lesser scholar entirely. He carried his vast learning within him, in his prodigious memory, and could draw upon it to write wherever he found himself, however difficult his circumstances. There are stories, which we should hold gently as the traditions that gathered around so famous a figure, of the extraordinary conditions under which he worked. It is said that he could dictate complex passages of his great works from memory, that he would work through the night with his students, that even imprisonment could not stop his writing. Whatever the precise truth of each account, they capture something real about him. A scholar whose devotion to his work was so complete, whose mind was so powerful, that no circumstance, however difficult, could prevent him from pursuing it. The turbulence of his age could drive him from place to place, but it could not stop him from thinking and writing, from pouring out the vast learning he carried within him into the works that would outlast all the dynasties and upheavals of his time. His wanderings took him, over the years, through many cities and regions of Persia and Central Asia, serving various rulers, fleeing various dangers, never settling long in any one place. He knew periods of favor and periods of danger, times when he served as a respected physician and advisor at a prince's court, and times when he had to flee for his safety, to hide even, by some accounts, to suffer imprisonment when the politics turned against him. Through it all, he continued his work, treating patients, advising rulers, teaching students, and above all writing, composing the great works that were taking shape in his mind, carrying his learning forward amid all the dangers and movements of his turbulent life. Let us consider more closely the world of courts and princes in which Ibn Sina spent so much of his life, for it was the setting of his wandering career, and understanding it helps us to picture the conditions under which he lived and worked. For Ibn Sina, like many scholars of his age, lived much of his life in the service of rulers, attached to the courts of the princes who governed the fragmented lands of his time. In that age, a scholar of Ibn Sina's gifts was a valuable asset to a ruler, and the princes of the time often sought to attach such scholars to their courts. A brilliant physician could heal the ruler and his family, a valuable service in an age when illness was a constant threat. A learned advisor could counsel the ruler on matters of state, bringing wisdom and knowledge to the business of governing. And a famous scholar added luster to a court, enhancing the prestige of the ruler who patronized him. For all these reasons, the princes of the age sought to attach scholars like Ibn Sina to their courts, offering them positions, support, and protection in exchange for their services. For the scholar, attachment to a court offered both opportunities and dangers. The opportunities were real: support and security, access to resources, the leisure to pursue one's studies, the protection of a powerful patron. Ibn Sina served as physician and advisor at various courts, and these positions provided him with the means to live and the opportunity to pursue his work, the support of patrons who valued his gifts. Without such patronage, it would have been difficult for him to devote himself to his studies, to find the means and the leisure for his scholarly work. The patronage of the princes was, in this sense, essential to his work, providing the conditions under which he could pursue his learning. But the dangers were real as well, for attachment to a court meant dependence on the fortunes of a ruler, and the fortunes of rulers in that turbulent age were precarious indeed. A patron might die, or be overthrown, or fall into conflict, and the scholar attached to his court would be cast adrift, forced to seek a new position, perhaps to flee for his safety. The politics of the courts were treacherous, full of intrigue and rivalry, and sudden reversals, and a scholar caught up in them could find himself in danger, through no fault of his own. Ibn Sina experienced these dangers: the precariousness of court life, the sudden reversals of fortune, the need to flee when the politics turned against him. His dependence on the patronage of princes, while it provided the means for his work, also exposed him to the dangers and instabilities of court life. A poignancy marks this situation: the dependence of the scholar on the patronage of the powerful, the way that the pursuit of knowledge required attachment to the precarious world of courts and princes. The scholar needed the support of a patron to pursue his work, but this support came at the cost of dependence, of vulnerability to the fortunes of the powerful, of entanglement in the treacherous politics of the courts. Ibn Sina lived this poignant situation, dependent on the patronage of princes for the means to pursue his work, yet vulnerable to the dangers and instabilities that this dependence brought. His wandering life, his movement from court to court, was in large part a consequence of this situation, the precariousness of the patronage on which his work depended. Consider how the conditions of scholarship have changed since Ibn Sina's age, and yet how some things remain the same. The scholar of today does not usually depend on the personal patronage of a prince, but on other forms of support, the institutions and structures that fund and enable scholarly work. And yet the dependence remains in a different form: the need for support and resources to pursue one's work, the vulnerability to the conditions and structures that provide or withhold that support. The particular form of dependence has changed, but the fundamental situation, the dependence of the pursuit of knowledge on forms of support beyond the scholar's control, remains. Ibn Sina's experience of this dependence, in the particular form of court patronage, reflects a perennial condition of the scholarly life, the dependence of the pursuit of knowledge on forms of support that the scholar does not fully control. And we might admire, again, the way Ibn Sina pursued his work despite the precariousness of his situation, the dependence and vulnerability that court life entailed. He did not let the instabilities of his patronage prevent him from pursuing his studies, did not allow the dangers of court life to defeat his devotion to knowledge. He used the opportunities that patronage provided, the support and resources and leisure, while enduring the dangers and instabilities it entailed, and through it all he continued his work, pursuing his learning amid all the precariousness of his dependent situation. It is another aspect of his remarkable devotion. The pursuit of knowledge sustained amid the precariousness and dependence of a life lived in the service of the powerful. Eventually, after years of wandering, he found a measure of stability at the court of a ruler in the city of Isfahan, in Persia, where he spent some of the most productive years of his life. Here, for a time, he enjoyed the favor of a prince who valued his learning, and he was able to pursue his work with somewhat greater peace, teaching, writing, and engaging in the scholarly discussions he loved. It was during this period of relative stability that he completed some of his greatest works. But even this peace was not to last, for the wars of the age eventually disturbed it, and Ibn Sina's restless and turbulent life continued, as it would, to its end. Yet amid all the turbulence, he had accomplished what few have ever accomplished. He had written works of such depth and brilliance that they would shape the course of human knowledge for centuries to come. Amid all the turbulence of his wandering life, Ibn Sina composed the works that would become his lasting legacy, and two of these stand out above all the rest as among the most influential books in the history of human thought. To these we must now turn, for they are the great monuments of his genius, the works through which his mind has reached across the centuries to shape the learning of civilizations far removed from his own. The first and most famous of these was his great work on medicine, a vast encyclopedia that gathered together the whole of the medical knowledge of his age, organized it systematically, and added to it his own observations and insights. Its title meant something like the canon, or the code, of medicine, and it aimed to be exactly that, a complete and systematic account of medicine, covering the principles of the science, the workings of the human body, the nature and causes of diseases, the methods of diagnosis and treatment, the properties of medicines, and much else besides. It was a work of immense scope and remarkable organization, gathering the medical learning of the Greeks and the Persians, and the scholars of the Islamic world into a single comprehensive system. What made this work so remarkable, and so enduringly influential, was its combination of comprehensiveness, organization, and practical utility. It gathered nearly the whole of the medical knowledge of its age into one place, organized it clearly and systematically so that a physician could find what he needed, and presented it in a way that was useful for the actual practice of medicine. It became, for this reason, the standard medical textbook across much of the world, studied by physicians in the Islamic world, and, after it was translated into Latin, in Europe as well. For some 600 years, this work remained a foundational text of medical education, taught in the universities of Europe into the 17th century, shaping the training of physicians for half a millennium. Few books in any field have had such a long and influential life. We should pause to feel the wonder of this, that a work composed amid the chaos of 11th century Central Asia and Persia should become the foundation of medical education across the world, shaping the training of healers for 600 years, in lands and languages its author never knew. The learning that Ibn Sina gathered and organized, the system of medicine he set forth, became the common inheritance of physicians across civilizations and centuries, a foundation upon which the healing art was taught and practiced for half a millennium. It is a staggering achievement, and it flowed from the mind of a man who composed it amid the turbulence and danger of his wandering life. Let us turn to consider more deeply Ibn Sina's work as a physician, for medicine was at the center of his life and his fame, and his contributions to the healing art were among his most enduring legacies. He was not only a theorist of medicine but a practicing physician, one who treated patients, who used his knowledge to heal, who brought his vast learning to bear on the relief of suffering. Medicine in Ibn Sina's age was a sophisticated science, built upon the inheritance of the ancient Greek physicians and extended by the scholars of the Islamic world. It rested on a theory of the body and its workings, of health as a balance and disease as a disturbance of that balance, of the ways in which the body could be restored to health through diet, medicine, and other treatments. The physicians of the age had gathered a great body of knowledge about diseases and their symptoms, about the properties of medicines, about the methods of diagnosis and treatment. And Ibn Sina mastered this whole body of medical knowledge, gathered it, organized it, and extended it in his great work on medicine. What made him a great physician was not only his theoretical knowledge, but his skill in the practical art of healing, his ability to bring his knowledge to bear on the actual treatment of patients. We have noted that even as a teenager he gained a reputation as a physician of unusual skill, sought out for his ability to heal, consulted even by older and established doctors. This practical skill, this ability to diagnose and treat actual illnesses, was as important as his theoretical knowledge, and it was the foundation of his fame as a physician. He was a healer, one who used his knowledge to relieve suffering, to restore the sick to health. His great work on medicine reflected this union of theory and practice, gathering the theoretical knowledge of the science and presenting it in a way that was useful for the actual practice of healing. It covered the principles of medicine, the workings of the body, the nature and causes of diseases, but it also covered the practical matters of diagnosis and treatment, the properties and uses of medicines, the methods of healing particular ailments. It was a work that a practicing physician could use, a comprehensive guide to the art of healing, and this practical utility was part of what made it so enduringly valuable, so widely used for so many centuries. A particular nobility belongs to the healing art, in the use of knowledge to relieve suffering and restore health, and Ibn Sina embodied this nobility. For all his philosophical brilliance, his mastery of the abstract sciences, he was also, and centrally, a healer, one who used his vast knowledge to help the sick, to relieve suffering, to restore health. His medicine was knowledge in the service of human good, learning applied to the relief of suffering. And there is a deep nobility in this, in the bringing of knowledge to bear on the most fundamental human needs. The greatest of his works, the one for which he was most famous and most enduringly influential, was a work of medicine, a contribution to the healing art, and it is fitting that this should be so, for it reflects the way his learning was, at its best, in the service of human good. We should note, too, the breadth and the humanity of his medical understanding, which extended beyond the merely physical to encompass the whole human being. By the accounts, his medicine attended not only to the body but to the mind and the emotions, recognizing the connections between the state of the soul and the health of the body, attending to the psychological as well as the physical dimensions of illness and healing. This was a sophisticated and humane understanding of medicine, one that saw the human being as a whole, body and soul together, and that attended to the whole person in the work of healing. It was an understanding ahead of its time in many respects, and it reflected the depth and the breadth of Ibn Sina's mind, which could see the connections between the different dimensions of the human being. The endurance of his medical work is one of the most remarkable facts of intellectual history. His great medical encyclopedia became, as we have noted, the standard medical text across much of the world for some 600 years, taught in the universities of Europe into the 17th century. For half a millennium, physicians were trained on the work of Ibn Sina, learned the healing art from his great encyclopedia, brought his knowledge to bear on the treatment of their patients. The healing knowledge that he gathered and organized and extended became the foundation of medical education across civilizations and centuries, benefiting countless patients through the physicians it trained. It is a staggering legacy, the relief of suffering across 600 years through the medical knowledge that one brilliant mind gathered and passed on. There is something deeply fitting in this, that the work of a healer should have such an enduring life, should continue to benefit the sick across the centuries through the physicians it trained. For the relief of suffering is among the most fundamental of human goods, and the knowledge that enables it among the most valuable. Ibn Sina gathered and extended the knowledge of healing, and passed it on in a work that trained physicians for 600 years, and through them relieved the suffering of countless patients across the centuries. It is a legacy of healing, of the relief of suffering, flowing across the centuries from the mind of the great physician, and it is among the noblest of all the legacies that learning can leave. His other great work was of an entirely different kind, a vast encyclopedia not of medicine, but of philosophy and science, whose title meant something like the Book of Healing, though the healing it offered was the healing of the soul through knowledge, the curing of ignorance. This enormous work aimed to set forth the whole of the philosophical and scientific knowledge of his age, covering logic, the natural sciences, mathematics, and metaphysics, the deepest questions about the nature of reality and existence. It was a comprehensive summation of the learning of his age, organized into a single great system, presenting Ibn Sina's understanding of the whole of knowledge. In this work, and in his philosophy more broadly, Ibn Sina built upon the inheritance of the ancient Greek philosophers, especially Aristotle, whose thought had been transmitted to the Islamic world and studied intensely there. But he did not merely repeat the ancient philosophy. He developed it, extended it, and reshaped it into a system of his own, addressing the great questions of existence, of the nature of being, of the soul, of God, in ways distinctively his own. His philosophical system became enormously influential, shaping the development of philosophy in the Islamic world for centuries, and, after his works were translated into Latin, profoundly influencing the philosophy of medieval Europe as well, where his thought helped to shape the great philosophical and theological developments of the age. We should note, with care, that Ibn Sina's philosophy touched on deep questions where his conclusions were debated, then and since. He grappled with the great questions of the relationship between philosophy and faith, between reason and revelation, between the inherited philosophy of the Greeks and the teachings of his religion. These were difficult and contested matters, and Ibn Sina's particular answers to them were not accepted by all. Indeed, some of his philosophical positions were sharply criticized by later thinkers, who held that he had given too much to the philosophers and not enough to the teachings of faith. We will not enter into these deep and contested debates, for they are complex and have been argued for 1,000 years, and they lie beyond the scope of our quiet story. It is enough to know that Ibn Sina was one of the great philosophical minds of his civilization, that he wrestled seriously with the deepest questions, and that his answers, whether accepted or contested, shaped the course of philosophical thought for centuries. Let us turn now to consider more deeply Ibn Sina's work as a philosopher, for alongside his medicine, philosophy was the great passion of his intellectual life, and his philosophical achievements were among his most profound and influential. For Ibn Sina was not content merely to know the sciences, to master the practical knowledge of medicine and the rest. He sought also to understand the deepest questions of existence, the nature of reality, of being, of the soul, of the divine. These deepest questions had been wrestled with by the great philosophers of the ancient world, especially the Greeks, whose thought had been transmitted to the Islamic world and studied intensely there. Ibn Sina immersed himself in this philosophical inheritance, mastering the thought of the ancient philosophers, especially the great Aristotle, whose works he studied deeply. But he did not merely absorb and repeat this inherited philosophy. He wrestled with it, developed it, extended it, and reshaped it into a system of his own, addressing the great questions of existence in ways distinctively his own. At the heart of his philosophy lay the deepest questions of all, the questions of being and existence itself. What does it mean for something to exist? What is the nature of being? What is the relationship between the things that exist and their ultimate source? These are among the most abstract and difficult questions the human mind can ask, the questions of what philosophers call metaphysics, the study of the deepest nature of reality. And Ibn Sina addressed them with great subtlety and depth, developing a sophisticated account of being and existence that would influence philosophical thought for centuries. We will not attempt to expound the details of his philosophy, for they are subtle and complex, the work of one of the great philosophical minds of history, and they require careful study to grasp. Nor will we enter into the debates and controversies that surrounded his philosophical conclusions, for these touch on deep and contested questions that have been argued for 1,000 years. It is enough, for our quiet purpose, to appreciate the depth and the seriousness of his philosophical work, the way he wrestled with the deepest questions of existence, and the profound influence his thought had on the development of philosophy in many civilizations. What we can appreciate, and what is worth dwelling on, is the spirit of wonder that animated his philosophical work, the deep desire to understand the ultimate nature of things. For philosophy, at its best, springs from wonder, from the amazement that there is anything at all, from the desire to understand the deepest nature of the reality we find ourselves in. Ibn Sina possessed this philosophical wonder to a profound degree, this deep desire to understand the ultimate questions, and it drove his philosophical work as his curiosity drove his scientific studies. He wanted not only to know the practical sciences, but to understand the deepest nature of reality, to penetrate to the ultimate questions of being and existence and their source. A nobility lives in this philosophical aspiration, this desire to understand the deepest nature of things, to grasp the ultimate questions of existence. It reflects the highest reach of the human mind, the capacity to ask not only practical questions but the deepest questions of all, the questions of why there is anything, of what it means to be, of the ultimate nature and source of reality. Most of us, caught up in the practical concerns of life, rarely ask these deepest questions, rarely lift our minds to the ultimate matters of existence. Ibn Sina lived in these deepest questions, devoted his powerful mind to understanding them, and there is a nobility in this aspiration that we can appreciate even without following the details of his answers. And his philosophical work connected, in his mind, with his religious faith, for he sought to understand the relationship between the philosophy he had inherited from the ancients and the teachings of his religion, between reason and revelation, between the conclusions of the philosophers and the truths of faith. This was one of the great projects of the philosophers of his civilization, to understand the relationship between the inherited philosophy and the religious tradition, and Ibn Sina wrestled with it deeply. His particular conclusions on these matters were debated and sometimes criticized, as we have noted, and we will not enter into these contested questions, but we can appreciate the seriousness with which he sought to understand the relationship between reason and faith, to integrate the philosophy he had mastered with the religious tradition he belonged to achieve a unified understanding of reality that honored both. We might reflect on the depth of mind required even to ask these deepest questions, let alone to address them with the subtlety and seriousness that Ibn Sina brought to them. To wrestle with the nature of being itself, with the ultimate questions of existence, with the relationship between reason and faith, requires a mind of extraordinary depth and power, capable of the most abstract and difficult thought. Ibn Sina possessed such a mind, one of the great philosophical minds of history, and he devoted it to understanding the deepest questions of existence. His philosophical work, alongside his medicine, represents the highest reach of his extraordinary mind, its application to the deepest and most difficult questions the human intellect can ask, and it influenced the development of philosophy in many civilizations for centuries after his death, shaping the way later thinkers wrestled with the same deep questions of existence. Beyond these two great works, Ibn Sina wrote a great many others on an astonishing range of subjects. He wrote on astronomy and mathematics, on physics and chemistry, on psychology and the nature of the soul, on logic and language, on music, even on poetry, composing verses of his own. The range of his learning and his writing was almost without limit, encompassing nearly every field of knowledge known to his age. He was a polymath in the fullest sense, a master of many sciences, who contributed to nearly every field he touched. And he wrote prolifically, producing a vast body of work across all these fields. Despite the turbulence of his life, and the relative shortness of his years, it is worth pausing to consider the sheer breadth of Ibn Sina's mind, the astonishing range of fields he mastered and contributed to. For it is one of the most remarkable things about him, and it marks him as a polymath of the first rank, a universal scholar of a kind rarely seen in human history. We have spoken of his medicine and his philosophy, the two great fields in which his achievements were most influential. But these were only the most prominent of the many fields he mastered. He was deeply learned in mathematics, in geometry and arithmetic, contributing to the mathematical sciences of his age. He studied astronomy, observing the heavens, considering the movements of the stars and planets, contributing to the astronomical knowledge of his time. He worked in physics, in the study of the natural world and its workings. He explored chemistry, or the science that preceded it, the study of substances and their transformations. He wrote on psychology, on the nature of the soul and the workings of the mind, with insights that were remarkably sophisticated for his age. Nor did his learning stop at the sciences. He was deeply versed in logic, the science of reasoning, which he considered the foundation of all sound thought, and he wrote extensively on it. He was a master of language and grammar, of the literary arts of his civilization. He even wrote poetry, composing verses of his own, bringing his powerful mind to the art of poetic expression. And he wrote on music, on the mathematical and aesthetic principles of the musical art. There was scarcely a field of knowledge known to his age that he did not master and contribute to, scarcely a science he did not encompass within his vast learning. This breadth is almost difficult to comprehend, for in our age of specialization, when scholars devote their whole lives to a single narrow field, the idea of one mind mastering nearly the whole range of human knowledge seems almost impossible. And yet this is what Ibn Sina did, mastering medicine and philosophy, mathematics and astronomy, physics and chemistry, psychology and logic, language and poetry and music, nearly the whole range of the learning of his age. He was a universal scholar, a master of all the sciences, a mind that encompassed the whole of human knowledge as it existed in his time. There have been few such minds in human history, few who have mastered so vast a range of knowledge, and Ibn Sina stands among the greatest of them. What made this breadth possible was, in part, the nature of knowledge in his age, when the various sciences were more unified, more interconnected, than they have since become. The growth of knowledge over the centuries has made each field vaster and more specialized, so that no one mind can now master more than a small part of the whole. But in Ibn Sina's age, the sciences were still unified enough that an extraordinary mind could encompass nearly the whole of them, mastering the connections between the fields, achieving an integrated understanding of the whole of knowledge. Ibn Sina possessed such a mind, and he achieved such an integrated understanding, mastering the whole range of the learning of his age and grasping the connections between its various fields. Something deeply admirable marks this universal learning, this aspiration to master the whole of knowledge, to achieve an integrated understanding of the whole of reality. It reflects a vision of knowledge as a unified whole, in which the various fields illuminate one another, in which the understanding of medicine connects with the understanding of the body, which connects with the understanding of nature, which connects with the deepest questions of existence. Ibn Sina pursued this unified understanding, this comprehension of the whole, and his universal learning reflects an aspiration to grasp not merely the parts but the whole of knowledge, to understand reality in its entirety. It is a noble aspiration, the aspiration to universal understanding, and Ibn Sina pursued it more fully than almost anyone in history. We might feel, in contemplating his universal learning, both admiration and a certain wistfulness, for the kind of universal understanding he achieved is no longer possible in our age of specialized knowledge. The growth of knowledge has made it impossible for any one mind to master the whole, has divided learning into countless specialized fields, each requiring a lifetime of study. We have gained enormously in the depth and detail of our knowledge, but we have lost the possibility of the universal understanding that Ibn Sina achieved, the grasp of the whole of knowledge in a single integrated vision. A wistfulness lingers in this, in the loss of the universal scholar, the mind that could encompass the whole of human knowledge. And there is, in Ibn Sina, a kind of monument to that lost possibility, a reminder of an age when a single extraordinary mind could grasp the whole of knowledge, could be a master of all the sciences, a universal scholar of a kind we shall not see again. And yet, even in our age of specialization, there is something we can learn from his universal aspiration, his desire to understand not merely a part but the whole, to grasp the connections between the fields, to achieve an integrated understanding of reality. We cannot master the whole of knowledge as he did, but we can cultivate something of his breadth of curiosity, his interest in the connections between fields, his aspiration to understand the whole rather than merely the part. His universal learning, while no longer possible to replicate, can still inspire in us a breadth of curiosity, an interest in the whole of knowledge, a resistance to the narrowing of mind that excessive specialization can bring. The sheer scope of his achievement, when we consider it whole, is almost difficult to comprehend. Here was a man who mastered nearly the whole of the knowledge of his age while still young, who then spent a turbulent life of wandering and danger, and who nonetheless composed, amid all that turbulence, a vast body of work across many fields, including two of the most influential books in the history of human thought. He gathered and organized and extended the learning of his civilization, and passed it on, in his works, to the generations and the civilizations that came after, shaping the development of medicine and philosophy for centuries. It is one of the most remarkable intellectual achievements in all of human history, and it flowed from a single extraordinary mind, devoted wholly through every hardship to the pursuit and the preservation of knowledge. As the years passed, the turbulence of Ibn Sina's life continued, and his restless wandering and ceaseless labor began, at last, to take their toll. He had lived a life of extraordinary intensity, pouring out the energies of his powerful mind in study and writing and the practice of medicine, all while moving through a dangerous and unstable world, serving demanding masters, fleeing recurring dangers. Such a life, for all the brilliance of its achievements, was a hard and wearing one, and it could not be sustained forever. One of the most remarkable aspects of Ibn Sina's legacy is the way his influence crossed the boundaries between civilizations, reaching far beyond the world in which he lived to shape the learning of distant lands and different cultures. This is worth dwelling on, for it speaks to something deep about the nature of knowledge and its capacity to unite even divided peoples. Ibn Sina was a scholar of the Islamic world, born in Central Asia, writing in Arabic, working within the intellectual tradition of his civilization. His immediate influence was within that civilization, where his works were studied, and his thought developed by the scholars who came after him. He shaped the development of medicine and philosophy in the Islamic world for centuries, a towering figure within his own intellectual tradition. This alone would have secured his place as one of the great minds of his civilization. But his influence did not stop at the boundaries of his own civilization, for in the centuries after his death, his works were translated into Latin, the scholarly language of medieval Europe, and through these translations his thought entered the Christian world of the West. There, in the universities and centers of learning of medieval Europe, his works were studied intensely, his medical encyclopedia becoming a standard text of medical education, his philosophical works profoundly influencing the development of European thought. Under the Latin form of his name, Avicenna, he became one of the great authorities of European learning. revered alongside the ancient masters, his influence shaping the development of medicine and philosophy in the West for centuries. A deep significance marks this crossing of boundaries, this flow of knowledge from one civilization to another, from the Islamic world to Christian Europe. For these were civilizations often divided by religion, by culture, by political conflict, sometimes by war. And yet, across these divisions, the knowledge that Ibn Sina had gathered and developed flowed freely, carried by translation from one civilization to another, becoming a common inheritance of both. European physicians learned the healing art from a Muslim scholar of Central Asia. European philosophers developed their thought in dialogue with his ideas. The divisions between the civilizations did not prevent the flow of knowledge between them, the sharing of the common inheritance of human understanding. This reflects a deep truth about the nature of knowledge, that it transcends the boundaries that divide peoples, that it is a common human inheritance rather than the possession of any single civilization. Truth is truth, wherever it is found, and whoever discovers it, and knowledge can flow across the boundaries of culture and creed, uniting distant peoples in a common understanding. Ibn Sina's learning, gathered from many traditions and developed by his own genius, became a common inheritance of East and West, Muslim and Christian, a shared treasure that transcended the divisions between the civilizations. In an age and a world so often divided, there is something deeply hopeful in this, in the way that knowledge could unite what so much else divided. Consider the role of translation in this crossing of boundaries, for it was through translation that Ibn Sina's thought entered the European world. Translation is a quiet and often unappreciated art, the patient work of carrying knowledge from one language to another, making it available to those who could not otherwise reach it. And yet it is through translation that the great crossings of knowledge between civilizations have occurred, that the learning of one people has become available to another. The translation of Ibn Sina's works into Latin was one such great crossing, making his learning available to the European world, and through it shaping the development of European thought for centuries. We owe a debt to the translators, the quiet workers who carried his knowledge across the boundary of language, making possible its profound influence on a civilization far from his own. And we might reflect, too, on what it means that Ibn Sina became a bridge between civilizations, his learning a common inheritance of peoples divided by so much else. It reminds us that beneath the divisions that separate human beings, there is a common humanity, a common capacity for understanding, a common inheritance of knowledge that can unite us across our divisions. The pursuit of truth, the love of understanding, the gathering and sharing of knowledge, are common human enterprises, transcending the boundaries of culture and creed. Ibn Sina embodied this common human pursuit of understanding, and his influence, crossing the boundaries between civilizations, testifies to the unifying power of knowledge, its capacity to bring together what so much else divides. In our own age, when the divisions between peoples and cultures remain so sharp, and when knowledge has become more shared and more global than ever before, there is something especially resonant in the example of Ibn Sina, the scholar whose learning united distant civilizations. He reminds us that knowledge is a common human inheritance, that the pursuit of understanding can be a bridge between peoples, that beneath our divisions there is a common humanity united in the love of truth. It is a hopeful example, and a needed one, in a world still so divided, and it is part of the enduring meaning of his remarkable life and influence. In his later years he served as physician and advisor to a ruler in the city of Isfahan, and he accompanied this ruler on his campaigns and travels. It was during one of these journeys, by the accounts, that Ibn Sina fell ill with a sickness of the digestive system, a colic, that he was unable to cure even with all his medical skill. We will not dwell on the details of his final illness, nor invent the scene of his passing, for the simple facts are dignified enough. The greatest physician of his age, who had healed so many others, came at last to an illness he could not heal in himself, and in the year 1037, in the city of Hamadan in Persia, Ibn Sina died, at the age of about 57. It was not a long life, by the measure of years, and there is something poignant in its relative brevity, given all that he accomplished, and all that he might still have done. He had packed into his 57 years more learning and more achievement than most could accomplish in twice the span, but we cannot help but wonder what more this extraordinary mind might have produced had it been granted a longer and more peaceful life. The turbulence of his age, which had driven him from place to place and denied him the tranquility his work deserved, may also have shortened his life through its constant strain and movement. He died as he had lived, amid the upheavals of his time, far from the place of his birth, a wanderer to the end. He was buried in the city of Hamadan, where he died, and his resting place there became, and remains, a place that people visit and honor, in memory of the great scholar and physician. We mention this gently and with respect, as the simple fact of how he has been remembered. For our story is of his life and his work, rather than of the honors paid after his death. It is enough to know that the restless wanderer found, at last, a resting place, and that his memory has been honored there across the centuries. But though his life ended, his influence did not, but spread and grew across the centuries and across the world, reaching far beyond anything he could have imagined. His great work on medicine became, as we have seen, the standard medical text across much of the world for 600 years, shaping the training of physicians in the Islamic world and in Europe alike. His philosophical works profoundly influenced the development of thought, both in the Islamic world and, through Latin translations, in medieval Europe, where his ideas helped to shape the great philosophical and theological developments of the age. His name, in its Latin form, became known throughout Europe, where he was revered as one of the great authorities of medicine and philosophy. A remarkable quality marks the breadth of this influence, reaching across the boundaries of language and religion and civilization. Ibn Sina was a scholar of the Islamic world, writing in Arabic, working in the lands of Central Asia and Persia. And yet his influence reached far beyond his own civilization, into the Christian world of medieval Europe, where his works were translated and studied and revered, shaping the development of European medicine and philosophy for centuries. He became a bridge between civilizations, his learning flowing across the boundaries that divided them, a common inheritance of East and West alike. In an age, and a world, so often divided, there is something deeply moving in this, in the way that knowledge and learning could flow across the boundaries of culture and creed, uniting distant civilizations in a common inheritance of understanding. Let us consider more closely the extraordinary qualities of mind that made Ibn Sina's achievements possible, for they are remarkable in themselves and worth dwelling on. For his accomplishments flowed not only from his devotion and his determination, but from a mind of truly exceptional power, possessed of qualities that set it apart from all but a handful of minds in human history. Foremost among these was his prodigious memory, his capacity to retain and recall vast quantities of knowledge. We have noted how, as a child, he memorized the entire sacred text of his faith, and how, as a young man, he could read a difficult text dozens of times until he had it entirely by heart. This extraordinary memory was the foundation of his learning, the storehouse in which he held the vast knowledge he had mastered. In an age when books were precious and not always available, a powerful memory was essential to the scholar, the place where knowledge was held ready for use, and Ibn Sina's memory was among the most powerful ever recorded, holding nearly the whole of the learning of his age. This prodigious memory was especially important given the circumstances of his life, for as a wanderer, often without access to libraries, frequently moving from place to place, he could not always rely on books, but he carried his vast learning within him in his memory and could draw upon it wherever he found himself. It is said that he could compose major works from memory, drawing on the knowledge he held within him, dictating complex passages without reference to books. His memory was, in a sense, his portable library, carrying the accumulated learning of his age within him wherever the turbulence of his life took him. This made him independent of the libraries and books that other scholars depended on, able to work wherever he was, drawing on the treasury of knowledge he held in his own mind. Alongside his memory was his power of concentration, his ability to focus his mind intensely on a problem until he had mastered it. We have seen this in his account of wrestling with a difficult text, reading it again and again, turning it over in his mind, refusing to give up until understanding came. This intense concentration, this capacity to focus the full power of his mind on a problem, was another of the qualities that made his achievements possible. He could bring the whole force of his powerful intellect to bear on a difficult question, sustaining his focus until he had penetrated to its heart, mastered its difficulty, grasped its truth. There are accounts, which we should hold gently as the traditions that gathered around so famous a figure, of the remarkable intensity of his concentration and work. It is said that he would work through the night, sustained by his devotion to his studies, that he could maintain his focus through long hours of intense intellectual labor, that even amid the distractions and dangers of his turbulent life, he could concentrate his mind fully on his work. Whatever the precise truth of each account, they capture something real about him, a capacity for sustained, intense intellectual focus that was among the sources of his extraordinary productivity. He could concentrate the full power of his mind on his work, sustaining that concentration through long hours and difficult conditions, and this capacity for focused intellectual labor was essential to all he accomplished. Consider these qualities of mind, the powerful memory, the intense concentration, and on how they relate to the achievements they made possible. For while Ibn Sina's gifts were extraordinary, beyond what most of us possess, the qualities themselves, memory and concentration, are ones that all of us possess in some measure, and that all of us can cultivate and strengthen. We cannot all have a memory like Ibn Sina's, but we can work to strengthen our own memories, to hold more of what we learn. We cannot all concentrate with his intensity, but we can work to improve our own concentration, to focus our minds more fully on our work. His example, while it reflects gifts beyond the ordinary, also points to qualities we can all cultivate, the memory and concentration that are the tools of all learning and achievement. And we might reflect, too, on the contrast between Ibn Sina's intense concentration and the distracted condition of our own age, which does so much to fragment our attention and scatter our focus. We live, many of us, in a state of constant distraction, our attention pulled in many directions at once, rarely able to concentrate fully on anything for long. And this distraction is a real loss. For deep work, deep understanding, deep achievement, require sustained concentration, the focusing of the mind on a single thing until it is mastered. Ibn Sina's intense concentration, his capacity to focus the full power of his mind on his work, was among the sources of his extraordinary achievements, and it stands as a kind of rebuke to the scattered, distracted condition of our own age, a reminder of the power of focused attention, the achievements possible to a mind that can concentrate fully on its work. There is, in this, a quiet lesson for us, an encouragement to cultivate the concentration that our age so undermines, to reclaim the capacity for focused attention that deep work requires. We cannot all have Ibn Sina's extraordinary gifts, but we can all work to strengthen our concentration, to resist the distractions that scatter our attention, to cultivate the focused mind that achievement requires. His example reminds us of the power of concentrated attention, and encourages us to reclaim it, amid the distractions of our age, as a tool for our own learning and work and understanding. There is a poignancy to Ibn Sina's life that we should not pass over, a cost to his restless genius that adds a note of sadness to the story of his brilliant achievements. for his was not an easy or a peaceful life, and the very intensity and turbulence that marked it exacted a price. We have noted the constant movement and insecurity of his wandering life, the absence of the peace and stability that his work deserved. But there was a cost, too, in the sheer intensity with which he lived and worked, the relentless pouring out of his energies in study and writing, and the practice of medicine, all amid the demands and dangers of his official positions. He drove himself hard, by all accounts, working through the night, sustaining an extraordinary pace of intellectual labor, giving himself little rest. And such a pace, sustained over years, amid the strains of his turbulent life, must have taken its toll on his health and his strength. It is perhaps not surprising, then, that his life was relatively short, that he died at about 57, not an old age even by the standards of his time. The intensity with which he lived and worked, the strains of his turbulent and wandering life, the relentless pouring out of his energies, may well have shortened his life, wearing down even his powerful constitution. There is a poignancy in this, in the thought that the very intensity of his devotion to his work, the relentless pace of his labor, may have cost him years of life, may have brought him to an early death. He burned brightly, but perhaps too brightly to burn long. A reflection is worth pausing on here, about the costs of a life of such intensity, such relentless devotion to work. We may admire Ibn Sina's extraordinary productivity, his pouring out of his energies in the pursuit of knowledge. But we should also recognize the cost of it, the toll that such intensity exacts, the way that a life lived at such a pace may wear itself out before its time. There is a balance to be sought, perhaps, between the intensity of devotion to our work and the care for our own health and well-being, a balance that Ibn Sina, in the intensity of his genius and the turbulence of his age, may not always have found. His example inspires us with its devotion, but it may also caution us about the costs of a life lived at too relentless a pace. We know the details of his life in part, because he left an account of it, an autobiography that he dictated, which one of his students continued after his death. This autobiography is a remarkable document, one of the few we have from a figure of his age, giving us a window into his life and his mind as he himself understood them. Through it we can glimpse his own sense of his life, his account of his astonishing youth, his learning, his work, his understanding of his own intellectual development. But we should read this autobiography with some care, as the scholars who study it have noted, for it was written not simply to record the facts of his life, but to illustrate his ideas, to present his understanding of the path to knowledge and truth. It is a shaped and purposeful account, not a neutral chronicle, and the memory of a brilliant man recalling his own life, especially his own astonishing youth, may polish the truth here and there, may present things in the most favorable light. We should not doubt the broad picture it paints, of a mind of extraordinary precocity and achievement, for this is confirmed by all we know of him. But we should hold its particular details with the care due to any self-account, recognizing that it is shaped by its author's purposes and colored by his understanding of himself. Still, the autobiography gives us something precious, a glimpse of one of the great minds of history as he understood himself, an account of his own intellectual development in his own words, and it reveals, among other things, the centrality of the pursuit of knowledge and truth to his sense of his own life. For the autobiography is, above all, an account of his intellectual journey, his pursuit of understanding, his quest for truth. This was, in his own understanding, the central thread of his life, the thing that gave it meaning and direction. The pursuit of knowledge, the quest for understanding, the search for truth. And this self-understanding, this sense of his life as centrally a pursuit of knowledge and truth, is itself revealing, telling us what mattered most to him, what he understood his life to be about. A moving quality lives in the way Ibn Sina understood his own life, as centrally a pursuit of understanding, a quest for truth. for it reveals the depth of his devotion to knowledge, the way it was not merely one activity among others but the central meaning of his life, the thing that gave it direction and purpose. He was, in his own understanding, a seeker of truth, a pursuer of understanding, and this was the deepest meaning of his life, the thread that ran through all its turbulence and achievement. And in this self-understanding, this sense of a life centrally devoted to the pursuit of understanding, there is something that speaks to all who have felt the pull of knowledge, the desire to understand, the quest for truth that, for some, becomes the central meaning of their lives. As we contemplate the extraordinary gifts of Ibn Sina and the way he used them, it is worth reflecting on the deeper question that his life raises, the question of gifts and their use, of what it means to be given great talents and to spend a life pouring them out. For this is, in a sense, the central question of his life, and it speaks to all of us, whatever our own gifts may be. Ibn Sina was given a mind of extraordinary power, one of the most remarkable in human history. This was a gift, not something he had earned or chosen, but a capacity bestowed upon him, a talent given. And the question that faced him, as it faces all who are given great gifts, was what to do with it, how to use the talent he had been given. He might have used it for his own advantage alone, to gain wealth and power and comfort. He might have wasted it, let it lie unused, squandered it on trivial pursuits, or he might use it to the full, pouring it out in the pursuit of understanding and the benefit of others. And this last is what he did, spending his extraordinary gift in the relentless pursuit of knowledge, the mastery and extension of learning, the composition of works that would benefit humanity for centuries. There is something admirable in this, in the full use of a great gift, the pouring out of a talent in worthy work, rather than wasting it or hoarding it for oneself. Ibn Sina did not waste his extraordinary gift, did not let it lie unused, did not squander it. He used it to the full, drove himself to master nearly the whole of the knowledge of his age, to extend it, to pass it on in works of lasting value. He took the gift he had been given and made the fullest possible use of it, pouring it out completely in the pursuit of understanding and the benefit of others. And in this full use of his gift, there is a kind of faithfulness, a faithful stewardship of the talent he had been given. Consider the responsibility that comes with gifts. The sense in which to be given a talent is to be given also a responsibility to use it well. For a gift unused is a gift wasted, a talent buried is a talent squandered. To be given great gifts is to be given the responsibility of using them, of not letting them lie idle, of pouring them out in worthy work. Ibn Sina seems to have felt this responsibility deeply, to have understood his extraordinary gift as something to be used to the full, not for his own glory alone, but in the pursuit of understanding and the benefit of others. And in fulfilling this responsibility, in making the fullest use of his gift, he accomplished what few have ever accomplished, leaving a legacy that has benefited humanity for 1,000 years. This question of gifts and their use is not only for the extraordinarily gifted like Ibn Sina, but for all of us. For all of us are given gifts of some kind, talents and capacities and opportunities, and all of us face the question of how to use them. We may not have gifts as great as Ibn Sina's, but we have gifts of our own, and the question of how to use them faces us as it faced him. Will we use our gifts to the full, pouring them out in worthy work, in the pursuit of what we are called to, and the benefit of others? Or will we waste them, let them lie unused, squander them on trivial pursuits, or hoard them for ourselves alone? Ibn Sina's life poses this question to us, the question of the faithful use of the gifts we have been given. And his example encourages us toward the full and faithful use of our gifts, whatever they may be. For he shows us what is possible when a gift is used to the full, poured out completely in worthy work. He took an extraordinary gift and made the fullest use of it, and the fruit of that full use has benefited humanity for 1,000 years. We may not have his extraordinary gifts, nor accomplish what he accomplished, But we can learn from the spirit of his life, the spirit of the full and faithful use of the gifts we have been given, the pouring out of our talents in worthy work rather than wasting them or hoarding them. His example calls us to use our own gifts, whatever they are, to the full, in the pursuit of what we are called to, and the benefit of others. There is, too, a particular nobility in the fact that Ibn Sina used his gifts not merely for his own benefit but for the benefit of others, for the advancement of knowledge that would help humanity. His medicine relieved suffering. His learning advanced understanding. His works benefited the generations and civilizations that came after. He used his gift not selfishly but generously, in the service of human good, pouring out his learning in works that would benefit others long after his death. And there is a nobility in this, in the use of a gift for the benefit of others, that elevates the full use of a talent into something truly admirable. Ibn Sina used his extraordinary gift generously, in the service of understanding and the benefit of humanity. And this generous use of his gift is part of what makes his life so admirable, so worthy of the contemplation that has kept his memory alive for 1,000 years. There is a final reflection worth dwelling on as we contemplate Ibn Sina's life, concerning the endurance of his work amid the turbulence of his age, the way that the knowledge he gathered and created outlasted all the upheavals among which it was produced. For there is something deeply significant in this, in the survival of his learning through and beyond the chaos of his times. Ibn Sina lived, as we have seen, in an age of great political instability, when dynasties rose and fell, when cities were conquered and destroyed, when the political order was in constant flux. The dynasty that ruled his homeland collapsed in his lifetime. The libraries that fed his learning were vulnerable to destruction. The courts he served were precarious and short-lived. It was an age in which much was destroyed, in which the works of human civilization were constantly threatened by the chaos of war and political collapse. And yet, amid all this destruction and instability, the knowledge that Ibn Sina gathered and created survived, outlasting the dynasties and the upheavals, enduring across the centuries to benefit civilizations far removed from his own. This is one of the remarkable things about knowledge, about the works of the mind, that they can outlast the political orders amid which they are produced, can survive the collapse of dynasties and the destruction of cities, can endure across the centuries when so much else is swept away. The dynasties that ruled in Ibn Sina's age are gone, their power vanished, their names known only to historians. The political conflicts that drove him from place to place are long since settled and forgotten. But the knowledge he gathered and created endures, still studied, still valued, still benefiting humanity 1,000 years after his death. The works of the mind outlasted the political order. The knowledge survived the turbulence. The learning endured when the empires crumbled. A deep consolation lives in this, a reassurance about the value and the endurance of the works of the mind amid the turbulence of history. For we live, all of us, in the flux of history, amid political orders that rise and fall, in a world of constant change and frequent upheaval, and it can seem at times that nothing endures, that all is swept away in the flux of events, that nothing we do can last. But the endurance of Ibn Sina's work, surviving and outlasting all the turbulence of his age, reminds us that some things do endure, that the works of the mind, the knowledge we gather and create, the understanding we achieve and pass on, can outlast the political orders and the upheavals, can endure across the centuries. The empires crumble, but the knowledge survives. The dynasties fall, but the learning endures. This is part of why the work of scholarship, the gathering and creating and passing on of knowledge, is so valuable, so worth the devotion that scholars like Ibn Sina gave to it. For in a world of flux and upheaval, where so much is swept away, the works of the mind offer something that can endure, something that can outlast the turbulence of history, something that can benefit not only one's own age but the ages to come. Ibn Sina gave his life to such work, to the gathering and creating and passing on of knowledge, and his work has endured, outlasting all the turbulence of his age, benefiting humanity for 1,000 years. His devotion was, in this sense, an investment in what endures, a contribution to the lasting inheritance of human understanding that survives the flux of history. And we who benefit from his work, 1,000 years later, are the proof of its endurance, the recipients of the knowledge that survived all the turbulence of his age to reach us. When we benefit from the medical knowledge he gathered, the philosophical understanding he developed, the learning he gathered and created and passed on, we are the heirs of work that outlasted the dynasties and the upheavals of 1,000 years ago, that survived the flux of history to benefit us still. The knowledge that Ibn Sina created amid the chaos of 11th century Central Asia and Persia has reached across 1,000 years to us, surviving all the turbulence between, a lasting inheritance that the flux of history could not destroy. A deeply moving connection runs across the centuries here, this reaching of Ibn Sina's work across 1,000 years to benefit us still. It connects us to him, across the vast gulf of time, in the common enterprise of understanding, the shared inheritance of human knowledge. His devotion to knowledge, sustained amid the turbulence of his age, reaches across the centuries to us, his work enduring to benefit us, his understanding surviving to enlighten us. And in benefiting from his work, in receiving the knowledge he gathered and created and passed on, we participate in the great enduring enterprise of human understanding, the gathering and passing on of knowledge across the generations, that outlasts the turbulence of history and connects the minds of distant ages in the common pursuit of truth. And here we begin to see the deepest meaning of his life, the thing that makes it endure beyond all the particulars of his works and his influence. His life was, above all, a demonstration of the power of the human mind devoted wholly to understanding, to the pursuit of knowledge sustained through every hardship and danger. He was given an extraordinary gift, a mind of remarkable power, and he spent his life pouring out that gift in the pursuit of understanding, mastering the knowledge of his age, extending it, and passing it on to the generations and civilizations that came after. He did this not in tranquility but amid constant turbulence, not in security but amid danger and exile. And yet his devotion to knowledge never wavered, his pursuit of understanding never ceased. There is a lesson in this that reaches across the centuries to each of us who hears it. It is the lesson of devotion to understanding, of the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake and for the benefit of others, sustained through every hardship. Ibn Sina was given a great gift, and he did not waste it, did not bury it, did not let the turbulence of his age prevent him from using it to the full. He poured it out completely in the pursuit and the preservation and the extension of knowledge, and the fruit of that devotion has benefited humanity for 1,000 years. We need not possess his extraordinary gifts to learn from the spirit of his life, the spirit of devotion to understanding, of using our gifts to the full, of pursuing what we are called to pursue, through whatever hardships we face. As we draw toward the close of his story, it is worth reflecting on the deepest impulse that drove Ibn Sina's whole life, the impulse that united all his varied learning and gave it its meaning, the love of understanding, the desire to know, the wonder at the world that moves the human mind to seek its truths. For beneath all his particular achievements, in medicine and philosophy and the many sciences, lay this single deep impulse, the love of understanding for its own sake. This love of understanding is one of the noblest and most distinctive of human capacities, the desire to know not merely for advantage, but for the sake of understanding itself, the delight in grasping the truth, in comprehending the world. It is the impulse that has driven the great scientists and philosophers and scholars of every age, the desire to understand the world we find ourselves in, to grasp its workings, to penetrate to its truths. Ibn Sina possessed this love of understanding to an extraordinary degree, and it drove his whole life, his mastery of the sciences, his pursuit of philosophy, his relentless quest for knowledge. He wanted to understand, and this desire, more than any hope of advantage or reputation, was the deepest engine of his learning. A beauty lives in this love of understanding, this delight in knowledge for its own sake, and it is worth cherishing and cultivating in ourselves. For we live in an age that often values knowledge only for its usefulness, for the advantages it brings, the problems it solves, the wealth it generates. And there is nothing wrong with the usefulness of knowledge. Ibn Sina's medicine was useful, relieving suffering and healing the sick. But there is also a value in knowledge for its own sake, in understanding pursued for the delight of understanding, in the love of truth that seeks it not merely for advantage but for itself. Ibn Sina possessed this love of understanding for its own sake, and it ennobled his whole pursuit of knowledge, giving it a purity and a depth that mere usefulness could not provide. Consider how our own age, for all its vast knowledge, has perhaps lost something of this love of understanding for its own sake, this delight in knowledge as a good in itself. We know more than any age before us, have access to more knowledge than ever, possess sciences more advanced than Ibn Sina could have imagined. And yet, amid all this knowledge, have we retained the love of understanding for its own sake, the delight in knowledge as a good in itself, the wonder at the world that moves the mind to seek its truths? Or have we reduced knowledge to mere usefulness, valued only for the advantages it brings? Ibn Sina's love of understanding, his delight in knowledge for its own sake, stands as a reminder of a deeper relationship to knowledge, one that cherishes understanding as a good in itself, that delights in truth for its own sake, that retains the wonder at the world that is the wellspring of all genuine learning. To contemplate such a love of understanding, as the night deepens, is itself a kind of rest, a turning of the mind from the anxious pursuit of advantage to the quiet delight of understanding. For there is a peace in the love of knowledge for its own sake, a peace that the anxious pursuit of advantage cannot provide. The mind that delights in understanding, that takes joy in knowledge for its own sake, that wonders at the world and seeks to comprehend it, finds in this a deep and quiet satisfaction, a peace that does not depend on outcomes or advantages, but rests in the delight of understanding itself. Ibn Sina knew this peace, the quiet joy of understanding, amid all the turbulence of his life. And we may glimpse something of it too, as we contemplate his love of knowledge in the quiet of the night. And so we might carry, from the contemplation of his life, not only admiration for his extraordinary achievements but something of his love of understanding, his delight in knowledge, his wonder at the world. We need not possess his extraordinary gifts to share something of his love of understanding, his delight in learning, his wonder at the truths of the world. We can cultivate, in our own way, this love of understanding for its own sake, this delight in knowledge, this wonder at the world we find ourselves in. And in doing so, we may find something of the peace that Ibn Sina found, the quiet joy of understanding, the deep satisfaction of a mind that delights in knowledge and wonders at the world. So as the night settles around you, and the day's concerns grow quiet, you might let your mind rest in the contemplation of this great seeker of understanding, this mind devoted to knowledge through every hardship, this love of truth that drove a brilliant life. There is a peace in such contemplation, a quieting of the restless mind, a turning toward the deep and quiet satisfactions of understanding. The boy who mastered all knowledge by 18, who became one of the greatest minds in human history, who pursued understanding through every danger of a turbulent age, has finished his brilliant and restless journey. And his love of understanding, his delight in knowledge, his wonder at the world remain, across the centuries, a quiet inspiration, calling us to cherish understanding, to delight in knowledge, to wonder at the world we find ourselves in, even now, even tonight, as we turn toward rest. Let us pause, before we let his story rest, to hold in our minds the central image of his life, the image that gathers up its meaning and has drawn admirers to his memory across 1,000 years. A brilliant young mind, in the great library of Bukhara, devouring the accumulated learning of the ages, his hunger for knowledge finding at last a treasury vast enough to feed it. There is, in this image, something that speaks to the deepest part of us, the recognition of a mind given wholly to understanding, delighting in knowledge, pursuing truth with all its power. For we are all, in our way, seekers of understanding, drawn to know the world we find ourselves in, delighting in the moments when something obscure becomes clear. And in Ibn Sina we see this human desire to understand raised to its highest pitch, a mind of extraordinary power given wholly to the pursuit of knowledge, mastering nearly the whole of the learning of its age, extending it and passing it on to the generations and civilizations that came after. He shows us what the human mind is capable of when it is given wholly to understanding, the heights it can reach, the achievements it can accomplish, the legacy it can leave. And he shows us, too, that this pursuit of understanding can be sustained through every hardship, that no turbulence or danger or exile need defeat the devotion to knowledge. He pursued understanding through a life of constant upheaval, composed his great works amid danger and movement and instability, and his devotion never wavered, his pursuit never ceased. He shows us that the love of understanding can be a steady light through even the most turbulent life, a constant amid all the flux, a devotion that no hardship can defeat. So as the night deepens and your thoughts grow still, you might carry with you a little of his spirit, his love of understanding, his delight in knowledge, his devotion to truth sustained through every hardship, not as a burden, but as a quiet inspiration, a reminder of what the human mind is capable of the heights that devotion to understanding can reach. The brilliant boy of Bukhara, who mastered all knowledge by 18 and became one of the greatest minds in human history, has finished his restless and luminous journey, and his love of understanding remains, across the centuries, a quiet light, calling us to cherish knowledge, to delight in understanding, to pursue truth with all the devotion we can bring, even now, even tonight, as we turn toward rest. And here we return, at the last, to the quiet question his life poses to each of us who hears it. He was given a great gift, a mind of remarkable power, and he spent his life pouring it out in the pursuit of understanding, undeterred by all the hardships and dangers of his turbulent age. His life asks us, gently, what we are doing with our own gifts, whatever they may be, whether we are using them to the full, pouring them out in the pursuit of what we are called to, or letting them lie unused, buried beneath the comforts and distractions and discouragements of our lives. It is a searching question, and a valuable one, and his life poses it to us with all the power of his extraordinary example. There is no need to answer that question tonight. Some questions are not meant to be solved quickly, but to be carried gently, turned over slowly, lived with over a long while. Let it rest beside you now, softly, asking nothing of you but a moment's quiet reflection. The boy who mastered all knowledge by 18, who became the greatest physician and one of the greatest philosophers of his age, who pursued understanding through every hardship of a turbulent life, has finished his own restless and brilliant journey, and you have followed it gently all the way to its peaceful end. So let your thoughts grow still. Let the great city of Bukhara fade into the dark, with its libraries and its scholars, and the wandering roads of Persia, and the brilliant mind that pursued understanding through every danger. Let the names and the dates drift away, for they have done their work. What remains is only the quiet, and the question, and the calm of the gathering night. May your mind grow easy, may your heart be untroubled, and may your rest tonight be deep and peaceful and kind.